Welcome to session
Okay.
with a really interesting mix of voices. We have an investigative journalist. We have a researcher who focuses on therapeutic relationships within systems like court-mandated treatment.
Right.
And we have a documentary filmmaker who's experienced homelessness and the mental health system firsthand.
Wow.
So our goal today is to unpack some common stereotypes and try to get to the reality beneath so that you can engage with this topic in a more informed way.
Yeah, it's fascinating how often the public discussion around homelessness relies on these overly simplistic and often dehumanizing narratives.
Right. It's like we've all seen that image, that disheveled person on a street corner, maybe shouting, labeled as severely mentally ill. And there's this like instant assumption that mental illness is the sole cause of their homelessness.
Right.
And often a feeling that they're refusing treatment and rotting with their rights home.
Yeah, and that's exactly where things get tricky.
Okay.
This popular narrative, while very common, is far from the whole picture.
Okay.
It's a caricature that overlooks the huge diversity of experiences within the homeless population and ignores the systemic issues that contribute to homelessness in the first place.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
One common misconception is that deinstitutionalization,
Yes.
the closure of those big psychiatric hospitals,
Right.
directly caused a surge in homelessness.
Right.
But research actually tells a very different story.
It does. Studies that tracked patients released from these institutions found that the vast majority were transitioned into other forms of care,
Yeah.
like group homes or supportive housing,
Okay.
not simply left on the streets.
So if deinstitutionalization isn't the main cause, why do we see such a strong link between homelessness and mental illness? We hear statistics like 82% of homeless individuals in a California survey reported experiencing a serious mental health condition in their lifetime.
Right.
That sounds alarming.
It's important to understand what lifetime prevalence really means.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're currently experiencing a mental health crisis.
Got it.
Just that they've experienced one at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
And those rates are actually comparable to or even lower than rates in the general population.
Wow.
Where lifetime prevalence of mental health disorders can be as high as 8.
Illness.
Right.
But wouldn't the stress of being homeless itself contribute to mental health struggles?
Absolutely. The constant instability, lack of safety, and trauma of living on the streets are a recipe for psychological distress.
Yeah.
It creates a vicious cycle.
Okay.
Homelessness contributes to mental health issues, and those issues make it harder to escape homelessness.
That makes sense. So if mental illness isn't the root cause, what is?
Well, the panel discussion pointed to another less obvious factor.
Okay.
The increasing criminalization of homelessness.
Okay.
Cities are enacting bylaws that basically make it illegal to exist in public spaces while homeless.
Really?
Yeah, things like sitting, lying down, or even just loitering can become offenses.
Wow, the panel mentions some cities have a shocking number of these bylaws.
They do.
Los Angeles with 21 and San Francisco with 24.
Wow.
It sounds like they're trying to push the problem out of sight instead of addressing it.
Exactly. And studies show that these policies actually lead to a huge increase in 911 and 311 calls.
Really?
What's called burden shuffling.
Burden shuffling.
These get called, individuals are moved along, the problem becomes more visible,
but
the root causes aren't addressed.
Right.
This only adds to public distress without actually helping anyone.
And plus, according to the Department of Justice, thousands of people are ending up in jail simply because they don't have housing.
Right.
That just perpetuates the cycle.
It does.
So we've got this misleading narrative, ineffective policies, and a system that seems to punish rather than support.
Right.
Why isn't this being talked about more?
That's a really important question. Acknowledging this reality forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths.
Okay.
It means recognizing that things like mass imprisonment and economic inequalities play a huge role in causing homelessness.
Yeah.
We'd have to admit our current policies aren't working, and even worse,
Yeah.
they're causing harm.
Right.
It also means looking critically at the mental health system itself.
Which is probably a conversation a lot of people would rather avoid.
Probably.
But to really grasp this issue, experiences offer really powerful insights.
His journey highlights how a system designed to help
Yeah.
can actually cause more harm,
Right.
and shows how desperately we need a more compassionate approach to mental health.
His story begins back in 2018 when he was going through a suicidal and started experimenting with microdosing LSD.
Wow.
Hoping to find some relief.
Right?
Sadly, it led to a psychotic episode, something he wasn't even aware of at the time.
It's important to emphasize that Patrick, like many individuals experiencing psychosis, wasn't intentionally trying to hurt himself or others.
Right.
He was in deep distress, desperately searching for a way out of his pain.
Absolutely. And tragically, his attempt to get help actually resulted in more trauma. He had a horrific experience at Mercy Hospital.
Wow.
He was physically restrained, forcibly medicated,
Wow.
and then released with no support or follow-up.
The use of restraints and forced medication, especially when there's no clear and present danger,
Right.
is a very worrying practice.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly traumatizing, especially for someone who's already vulnerable, and can even make mental health outcomes worse.
Patrick describes the experience as torture.
Oh, wow.
And it clearly left lasting scars.
Yeah.
But what's even more disturbing is that his story isn't unique.
Unfortunately, this kind of treatment is all too common in the mental health system.
Really?
Studies have shown that the suicide rate after psychiatric holds is over 100 times the global average.
Wow.
Even for people who weren't suicidal before.
That's awful.
That alone speaks volumes about the need for change.
Patrick's story takes another devastating turn when he ends up homeless.
Oh, no.
Now grappling with the trauma from the hospital and struggling to cope.
Right.
He has another psychotic episode and is taken to St. Vincent de Paul Hospital, where once again he encounters a system focused more on control than care.
This cycle of trauma and re-traumatization is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It shows how the system can fail those who need it most,
Mm-hmm.
and underscores the need to shift from coercion to compassion and genuine support.
There's a video Patrick filmed of his experience at St. Vincent de Paul,
Okay?
and it's really unsettling to see the reality of forced treatment.
Yeah.
He's clearly in distress, struggling to communicate his needs,
Mm-hmm.
and the staff respond with force, ending in a violent altercation that leaves him unconscious.
The video is a powerful reminder of how dehumanizing forced treatment can be.
Yeah.
It's easy to watch and just see someone out of control or dangerous,
Right.
but we have to recognize the pain, the fear, the desperation driving those actions.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick was crying out for help, and the system responded with violence.
Yeah.
It's chilling. His words in the video, "I need real help, I need to talk," are haunting.
It's a reminder that even in moments of extreme vulnerability, the system can fail to provide the compassion and support that's so desperately needed.
And that brings us to the heart of the matter.
Okay.
We need a system that listens, that understands, and that offers genuine help instead of just trying to control people.
Yeah.
Patrick's story is a stark reminder of the human cost of our current approach to mental health and homelessness.
It really makes you question the effectiveness,
Mm-hmm.
even the ethics, of how we approach mental health and homelessness.
But even within these big systemic failures, there are glimmers of hope.
Okay.
Patrick's advocacy actually led to some significant changes at Mercy Hospital.
Wow.
They implemented mandatory training for staff on de-escalation techniques and nonviolent intervention.
Really?
They got rid of 4-point restraints and started involving patients in their own treatment plans.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It shows that even institutions with a history of relying on force can change.
It's a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah.
But it's just one hospital, right? To make a real difference, we need system-wide change
Mm-hmm.
that prioritizes a compassionate and effective approach to mental health care.
Absolutely. And Patrick's story also highlights something else.
Yeah.
The power of human connection.
Yeah.
Finding stable housing and having supportive friends were turning points in his recovery.
That brings us to something called the Housing First model. It's kind of revolutionary because it focuses on providing immediate access to housing without preconditions like sobriety or being in treatment.
It seems counterintuitive,
It does.
but the research shows it works.
Right. The panel mentioned a Canadian study where people in the Housing First group had way higher rates of staying housed,
Okay.
and their overall quality of life improved dramatically.
Exactly. And yet, despite its proven success,
Yep.
Housing First is still underfunded and not used nearly enough.
Right.
I think it comes down to that US versus them mentality we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's hard for some people to accept that housing is a basic human right.
It challenges the dominant narrative.
Yeah.
As we've seen, the narrative is often rooted in fear and a desire for control rather than a willingness to understand the real issues.
The panel brought up some pretty influential voices like the New York Times
Right.
that are actually advocating for things like bringing back asylums and removing homeless individuals from public spaces.
That thing, rhetoric, is so dangerous because it dehumanizes people and fuels stigma.
Yeah.
It also justifies more coercion and control,
Right.
which is a huge step backward.
It feels like we're trying to erase the progress we've made in understanding and treating mental health as a social issue.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What can be done to shift the conversation?
One thing that's crucial is elevating the voices of people with lived experience.
Okay.
We need to hear directly from those who've navigated the system like Patrick.
Right. And support initiatives like soteria houses, which offer community-based care without coercion.
Absolutely.
And, of course, advocating for policies like Housing First that get to the root causes of homelessness.
Exactly. We need a multi-pronged approach that combines those systemic changes with individual empowerment.
Yeah.
And that means challenging the language and the media portrayals that perpetuate stigma.
Your own research focuses on something fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
How to build therapeutic relationships within coercive contexts.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Of course, I specifically look at assisted outpatient treatment,
Okay.
or AOT,
AOT.
which is court-mandated treatment that can last up to a year.
Wow.
It often involves things like involuntary removal from a home and 72-hour holds if someone doesn't comply.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It can be.
Yeah.
And it disproportionately affects Black and Hispanic individuals.
Wow.
My research examines how we can build trust and genuine connections with people who are essentially being forced into treatment.
Right.
It's a tricky balance because coercion, by its very nature, undermines a therapeutic relationship.
Like trying to build a house on a foundation of distrust.
Exactly.
It's hard to imagine someone feeling safe enough to open up in therapy if they're being pressured or coerced.
Absolutely. But despite these challenges, my research has shown that skilled AC teams, assertive community treatment teams,
Yeah.
can often establish positive relationships with clients under AOT.
That's encouraging to hear, but you've also pointed out that even in those settings, there can be subtle forms of coercion and paternalism.
Yes, the power dynamics are always present.
Yeah.
We have to be incredibly mindful of how even seemingly small things we say or do
Right.
can impact the person we're trying to help.
Can you give us an example from your work that illustrates this?
Certainly, I had one client, an older gentleman, who was incredibly offended by being labeled a criminal because of his AOT status.
Oh, wow.
He had no history of violence, and he saw himself as a responsible member of his community.
Yeah.
That label created a barrier between us, right from the start.
It shows that even words that seem harmless can carry a lot of weight for someone who's already experienced stigma.
Exactly. And then I had another client, a woman with severe anxiety, who became increasingly avoidant because she was terrified of being forcibly removed for something minor.
Wow.
That fear kept her from being completely honest with me, which ultimately hindered her progress.
That's heartbreaking. It shows how coercion can create an atmosphere of fear and distrust,
Yeah.
which goes against the very goals of treatment.
It's why open and honest dialogue is so crucial. We need to be talking with our clients about how coercion affects them, how it makes them feel, and how we can navigate those complicated power dynamics together.
Instead of doing to, it's doing with.
Exactly.
Recognizing that each person has dignity and autonomy.
Right.
Even when the system seems designed to take those things away.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to be active participants in their own care,
Yeah.
which can be difficult in a system that often feels very disempowering.
Right.
It's a challenge, but it's so important.
We've covered a lot of challenging territory in this deep dive.
We have.
We've seen how the narrative around homelessness and mental health is often misleading.
Yeah.
How our policies can be ineffective and even harmful.
Yeah.
And how the system itself can perpetuate trauma.
Right.
But your research, your work, offers hope.
I believe that hope lies in constantly questioning our assumptions and advocating for a more compassionate and just approach.
Yeah.
We need to be willing to confront our own biases and to truly listen to the people we're trying to help.
And I think it goes back to challenging that US versus them mentality.
Absolutely.
How can we start breaking down those barriers?
It starts with recognizing our shared humanity. We need to move beyond the labels and the stereotypes and see each other as individuals worthy of dignity and respect.
Yeah.
We are all connected, and the well-being of each person impacts the well-being of our communities.
Your words are powerful and give me hope.
I'm glad to hear that. It really feels like a shift in perspective is needed.
Yeah.
We've focused a lot on these big systemic issues.
Right.
But what about at the individual level?
Yeah, what can people listening do to make a difference?
Even small acts of kindness can be incredibly powerful.
Okay.
Offering a listening ear to someone who's struggling, extending a helping hand.
Yeah.
Simply acknowledging someone's existence with empathy.
Right.
These gestures could be antidotes to the dehumanization that's so prevalent.
It's about recognizing the person,
Yes.
not the label. Seeing the human being behind the diagnosis or their circumstance.
Exactly. And remembering that recovery and healing are always possible,
Yeah.
even in the face of immense challenges.
Right.
Patrick's story is a testament to that.
Yeah.
He found his way back from a really dark place, not through forced treatment or institutionalization,
Right.
but through human connection,
Yeah.
community support,
Yeah.
and believing in his own worth.
His story really underscores that we all have the capacity for healing and growth,
Yes,
even amidst immense challenges.
absolutely. Even in the darkest times, there's always light to be found.
This deep dive has been both enlightening and profoundly moving.
It has.
We've challenged common stereotypes,
Mm-hmm.
uncovered some difficult truths,
Yeah,
and explored the complexities of homelessness and mental health
right.
in a way that I hope has been impactful for you listening.
It's been a privilege to share this journey with you.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay?
What small gesture can you make today to challenge that youth versus them narrative?
Right.
What can you do to contribute to a more compassionate and supportive community?
Maybe it's a simple act of kindness,
Yeah.
a willingness to listen without judgment, or even just educating yourself and others about the realities of homelessness and mental health.
Maybe it's reaching out to someone you know who's struggling, volunteering at a local organization, or speaking up when you see injustice.
Absolutely.
Every action, no matter how small,
Yeah.
can ripple outward and create change.
Let's choose compassion over fear,
Yeah.
understanding over judgment, and action over apathy.
Let's work together to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to heal, thrive, and live a life filled with dignity and purpose.
I love that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
We'll see you next time.